our reports, when they get background, they start with the most recent first.
She kind of sings. So I've been
And the others are the other way around. Yeah.
I like it the other way, personally.
I don't. I like.
No,
Because if I'm looking
I
at
like.
historical, what's happened, I want to know what
Where
happened
did
in
it
the
start?
beginning and now where we are now. Otherwise, I just start at the bottom.
I don't care which way, just so that it's consistent. I want them all
But it
to
does
be
go
the
back and
same
forth.
way. But some of them start
No, I
with the
appreciate
newest,
that.
and some of them start with the
Yeah.
oldest, and I'm like,
like
I just
the newest
assumed it was a preference of the.
yeah.
I don't. It doesn't matter to me. So if you guys
See,
have
and
strong
it-
preference,
you
then
know,
attorneys, I can get you sit. And so I'm gonna go with whatever I feel like.
tells me which is which.
Yeah, right. Which way are we going?
All right, we are on air, so call the work session to order, and we'll start with legal services discussion, and this will be led by City Manager Ann Rober.
So that's funny. I'm just kidding. I wrote the staff report in hopes that you guys would have enough content to be able to talk, but I'm losing my voice, so I'm not doing a whole lot of presenting, which is why it's funny. But I'm here to answer questions. This really is an open dialogue between you about whether or not you want to bring an in-house attorney. We believe that we have the budgetary ability to do that, and even if we go slightly higher in pay, that we have the ability to do that in-house. But you have some things you lose. And so Tim Remus is here to talk about what you lose, or his thoughts or concerns as well, if you guys have any questions for either of us. So I was just going to open up for dialogue if it works.
I had a couple of questions about, before we get into the dialogue. I was looking at on page 2.
Yeah.
Where it breaks it down by department, and you have an average there at the end. And for human resources, it was awfully low. It's $19.94.
A separate contract.
Okay, because I was wondering, Hillsborough had so much. 40% of their legal budget was personnel matters. So that I was curious about that.
So we used to use the group that just folded. They are, what was it, through the league. So LGPI. Mm-hmm. Several of their attorneys left. And at the time, Bill Monahan was the city manager. He worked with HR. One of the attorneys that left was our right hand around those issues. And so we decided to contract directly with that attorney.
Okay.
And that attorney continues to provide us service for our union negotiations. Tim's team has done our diversity training. That's what most of this pays for, is when we do diversity training for staff, because they have an excellent presentation around it.
Okay.
What we tend to recommend is use somebody other than your regular city attorney when you're negotiating contracts. Use us for day-to-day HR, but it's tough to be at the table negotiating a contract today and tomorrow say, I'm your lawyer.
Right.
And all the process.
So Jordan Ramus, though, does day-to-day HR work. It was just more for the labor
Union
negotiation.
negotiations.
Yeah, but I think that we've been using our HR attorney to do employee terminations.
That's your choice, but we have the ability to do it.
Who is that person?
Steve, hold on one second. Do you know Steve's last name? I can tell you. It's just going to take me a
It's
second.
fine. It's not a big deal. I just didn't know. Okay.
So I knew we'd had a different one for because we met him when we did labor negotiations a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and he'll be back here soon.
I didn't realize he did other HR, like termination and stuff. I thought he was purely just the labor.
Labor negotiations. I did too, actually.
Yeah.
I think that was probably a natural assumption.
My other question was that I know a lot of the city attorneys, they take on a criminal prosecution element. We don't do that, right? And does that just purely done when we have code enforcement? It's all done by Tim, or do we not? Do we have a contract where there's?
We have a prosecutor.
We have a prosecutor. It's Brett. No, I'm sorry, Rhett's again. Sorry. Tell you. Brett comes in through contract. We actually just re-upped him for the first time. He has a 3-year contract. Bernstein.
Okay.
He's actually the judge for several of the cities as well, so he does primarily this kind of litigation.
We'll get involved in those if Brett says, hey, this has got kind of a land use twist to it, or something unusual that's outside his usual prosecutorial background.
So then, on code enforcement,
Why
where
was it
it's
so
the
high?
second highest item, is that counting Rhett's time, or is this?
No, this was actually a lawsuit that I believe Tim ran for us with his team. And I believe it was around the railroad.
You know,
Uh-oh.
we,
Oh, yeah.
This is,
Yeah.
when these code enforcement things blow up into a contested proceeding,
So
get involved.
the discussion that I've had with staff is that about 30% on average is within the city manager's office. About 10% on average is with land use. We've seen an increase around real estate in the last couple of years working with Dan. But those are, so ordinance review, which is pretty much everything else. Ordinance review and resolution review. 10% on land use, and probably I'd say another 7%, 8% on real estate.
Okay.
So basically a half, if you're saying a third.
A third on your meetings, making sure that I am working on Rock Island, for instance, ended up falling in my portfolio. Working on any lawsuits end up falling in my portfolio. So some even smaller ones. Those are kind of the catch-all for city governance work. And then checks work, a lot of Alma's work, a lot of Haley's work is ordinance review. And then you've got land use with Denny, that was about 10%. And then Alma also had a portion that's that real estate purchase part, as did a couple other departments like Casanelli.
So that's
what
like if that's at 17%, then on top of a third, that's half, basically. So half is needing prep. I mean, half is ordinance review, resolution review, and half is other stuff. Okay.
So included in that 10% on land use, is that the time that there's a lawyer at the planning commission meetings?
So that's your planning
It's
commission
not just
prep
going
and
through the
all that.
packet, it's
Yeah.
that too.
So what happened in fiscal year 16, well actually what happened in fiscal year 15, where streets, water, wastewater, stormwater and all that were exactly the same amount and then they haven't had anything? Is there something that occurred during all that where it was transferred to something else, or?
The thing that continues for that one is the purchase of a piece of property. And so my guess is that we actually put that under Public Works Admin. The other was looking at rates, I believe. It's just making sure that we did our rate schedule, but it was de minimis amount of work.
Yeah, it just looked weird that there was nothing.
Drop to nothing. Yeah.
It's also how different directors manage this. We've been working with Peter on his budget for this year. He's putting far more centralized into his Public Works admin budget and taking less in the smaller teams that he has so that he can basically give and get as they need to for different parts of his team.
What do we normally spend roughly in a year for the prosecution services?
I can actually look up the contract while we're sitting here. Hold on 1 second. It's not a ton.
I mean, that's not just code enforcement, but that's citations too?
Whenever.
Traffic? Any of those that get contested or whatever?
Yeah. Are there other questions while I'm looking at this?
So you're saying in cities that say only have one or two attorneys, that those attorneys are also the prosecutors?
Some do.
Interesting.
Like the Canby in-house gentleman who's shown up at a couple of our meetings, he does all the prosecutions. And I was noticing when I was just looking at the job description, some mention you will be doing prosecutions and some don't. When I was at Barry Ellsman, we didn't do any prosecutions. They always had hired that out, I guess like what Milwaukee's doing.
We've done both over the years, but I think the system here is probably the most efficient, where you have the contract prosecutor, and then if there's something that's going beyond what that person's comfortable with, you bring in some help.
I agree with that. It's hard to keep up with both criminal and civil.
Yeah.
They're very different.
Yeah, there are two different skill sets to be the prosecutor than to be reviewing ordinances and stuff.
I
Yeah.
think so.
They're not Yeah.
So the not to exceed amount on the prosecutor is $45,000 a year.
How much?
45,000. I'm knowing what we paid the judge. We're not even coming close to that. So I'm getting you the exact number from Haley.
Okay.
Is there any other clarifying questions anybody has?
I thought this was helpful, the salary examples, because that was my big question was,
What's real?
what's real to offer as a salary? It's not just get somebody right out of law school. I mean, we don't want that.
No, and if you guys decide you want in-house, what I would love is kind of the specs of what you're looking for. We can send you, Gary Ravello and I can send you an outline of a job description based on the percentages that we have in here, just so that people get a sense for what kind of strengths we're looking for. I'd propose working directly with Counselor Abna, if that's comfortable for people, just to make sure that the job description is comparable to other cities. And then we'd send it to you guys, make sure that it was clean, and then we would need to go out and do a comparison with other cities to get you a pay scale, to get you a sense for what we really realistically would need to pay in order to get the caliber of the person we want. So I know it's a little vague as to what you would pay, which is why I say you can go up a little if you guys feel like that's needed to get the caliber of person. But I wanted you to get a sense, just based on the early conversations, at least that Counselor Abna and I had around a general salary range, so that you guys could get a sense for what the budget impact could be.
And the League of Oregon Cities has a nice packet too that I had sent you. Maybe I don't know if I CC'd you, or I don't know if I put it on all of you, but the League of Oregon Cities does so you're trying to recruit an attorney, whether in-house or not. Here are the things you need to go through, here are the interview type things, considerations, et cetera. It was a pretty good packet. I haven't looked through it all, but
And if it didn't, I thought it'd gone out to everyone, but if it hasn't, I'm happy to forward it. Okay, then we'll get that out to you. And you guys could come back and tell us, we could have another 10 minutes at the start of another meeting and chat about this briefly, about any other pieces you want to add to a job description. We just really need to know what you're looking for before I get you a model for how much it's going to cost. I can't give you a definitive until I know. Yeah.
If we were to go with an in-house attorney, what other staff support are you expecting?
So the only thing that I'm proposing in the staff report is that Christina would take on a third executive, basically. So she currently provides service for me and for Kelly. Sorry, so it would be a third person. We right now have her working on grants for the library fundraising component. She's doing that probably about 50% of her time. That's expected to stop. If you were to bring someone on, I would really hope we didn't do that until July, just to give us sufficient time. That would unload by that point to open up time on her schedule.
That was my other question, was what you think the time frame might be, and then also what other thought you may have given to space.
Yeah, that was another question I have, space.
Yeah.
I've been having this really lovely conversation with one of my counselors so far, but I'm having it with a second council member who offered to help us with space discussions. We have some options. I'm getting some bids right now on how to build space out based on our increasing staff needs, especially if we continue forward with the bond. So we have to build out some space. And we think we've come up with a more affordable option than what was proposed in 2008 by a substantial amount. At that time, the proposal was around $800,000 to do a single portion of the roof. We're now looking at closer at $300,000. So that then is something I can work into the budget. If that doesn't work, then we've got some room upstairs up here that we can make work for an attorney in the time being while we're trying to construct that kind of room. I feel strongly they need to be near Christina, just because she's going to be assisting.
Oh, sure.
So that's the one contingent, is they would have to be in this space with me.
Yeah, it would be most reasonable.
Yeah.
So that was one of the questions that I have, looking through this. Most of the cities kind of in our rough size range seem to have at least an attorney with either a legal assistant or a legal secretary. I have no idea. Never even played an attorney on TV, so does that hold water that an attorney by themselves are going to enter that functional?
If you're not doing litigation, which is where you need some paralegal skills, which is a little bit different than just a legal assistant. I have found that younger attorneys tend to do their own typing, and they know how to compose of this and that, and so they're less reliant on an assistant. I think you could probably get by with a half assistant, at least starting out and trying
A third, I was just saying, I think law firms typically a third is not unusual. Yeah.
Oh, there's almost always, they have multiple attorneys.
Yeah, multiple, so I would.
Our staff at Metro, one legal assistant works with three people.
Yeah.
Haley Fish also did some calculations looking at our numbers and our rates right now for how many hours we get for what we're paying. And you will have more time with an attorney under a full-time attorney inside government. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that that's going to be more legal time, right? So they're going to have to do more of their own work, legwork.
Right.
And so I think that you'll fill it. But I do think there's some bandwidth in there to be able to fill it at least for a while. But this is an art, not a science. And we may come back to you in 4 years and say this we need more. Mm-hmm. Or the economy may be in a different place and we need less. I don't know.
Understandable.
Well, and I think that could be part of the consideration, of the job description too. I mean, just understanding that you're going to, you'll have an assistant that is shared among 3 executives, and, part of the expectation is that you be a little bit self-sufficient on certain things.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
So, and then I guess my other question is, obviously one attorney is going to have X amount of expertise and all the things that we have to deal with. Do we think we can find one that can cover 2/3, 90% of what we need, and then the rest we can outsource?
Well, and I would actually even take that one step further. I think I'm making an assumption here. And I haven't talked to Tim about it, which is I'm assuming you would be willing to stay on in a contract with us as long as we renegotiated that contract with you for that added service.
The city, I hope you do the best you can do. So I'm flexible in terms of providing. I'm in a service business, right? So I would be remiss if I didn't say I think that the projection of 50,000 for outside services is light.
Okay.
I think that would work in a year where you didn't have a lot of demand, but I suspect in a year that's even close to 2016, that number may be closer to 100, 125. Just based on the hours.
Yeah, I just assume anytime we get into a lawsuit, it's going to go up a bunch.
I don't mean just a lawsuit, just how busy you are. You have 660 hours roughly of paralegal time, which I assume goes away because your in-house person is going to do that. You've got 325 hours of associate time, which that person's going to do. And the balance of their time, there's 575 more hours there. And I doubt that one person's going to cover all of that 1,500 hours. So as you get up in the higher numbers, that's where you're probably going to be looking outside. So
well, and I think
that's the variable.
In terms of the how much can they take, that's hopefully is going to grow over time, right?
Sure.
So the amount that we need an outside counsel is higher. Even allowing other things to be equal should be higher in year 1 than in year 3.
My assumption is that person hits the ground running and can do the work.
Yeah.
And isn't just going outside because they're learning.
Yeah.
It's they're going outside because they're pretty much forced to by the volume of work or some specialty.
Yeah.
But yeah, all of us get better hopefully each year. So, which is why this is a better idea than me than the NBA.
Well, I'd like to hear if you have anything else you want to add in, Tim, regarding this potential change. But I'll tell you, my thoughts on it are we've gone through some of the pros and cons, so I'm not going to beat that dead horse, and I thought it was a close call even then. No one person, no in-house city attorney is going to have the breadth of knowledge that a law firm has. We know that. Mm-hmm. There are some advantages of having in-house, however. And so there's the pros and cons, and we've read the memos. for me, the change in the rates kind of sealed the deal in that when you start looking at the rates going forward, and if we negotiate at the ones that have been recommended, it now becomes cost effective to the degree that before it wasn't, it now is. And so I think I personally would be in favor of in-house. That's where I sit. But I'd like to hear if
Well, on the numbers,
those rates were...
On the numbers, Gary's projections are basically the same. He's projecting an in-house with 50 of outside services coming in at about 250. And he projects with our increase about the same number. So you're not getting savings, but they're competitive. And so then it becomes a question of choice. I think that if you have someone in-house, you're providing a higher level of service for the folks in-house, but it costs you something. Outside counsel, the way we deal with that is schedule office hours, which we do some here now, and try to use technology better. I mean, our firm has offices in 3 different places, so we're always using FaceTime and Skype. And I think the city could benefit from being a little bit more aggressive about using that sort of thing. Use the phone more than email because you get more information, those sorts of things. To me, it's really a question of are you trying to service in-house, service the folks here a little more with a little higher level of presence or not? There's money to be saved. I think in the long run using outside counsel, and that's what the data shows. I mean, you're going to end up spending more money, but you maybe get a high level of service for your staff. It's, to me, the choice.
And I know at one point, Ann, you had talked about when it comes to comparing the prices, that you felt like they're underutilized. Jordan Ramos is underutilized because you're so worrisome about every hour is going to cost more, so you don't use them as much as you would.
Well, and that's part of why I pulled out this year, because you can see basically the day I came in, that concern that I had, because we had overspent. When 30% of the budget comes out of my office, and so much of my budget was already gone before I walked in, I got nervous, and we had to pull back dramatically, and I don't think that is sustainable. So if you want to continue, my statement back to council is simply, I'm going to be spending the full amount from here on out, because I'm playing a little bit of a dice game, right? If I don't call Tim as much, then, and I make some decisions, and they're not necessarily perfect, we pay for it. And I can't do that long term. We've got to make sure that we have legal review on everything. So I'm probably erring more than I should, but we've been really cautious about overspending our budget on that.
I'll throw in one other thought to consider. When I first tried this, I wasn't in favor of it. It's the West Lynn idea, where you've got an in-house person and outside counsel, but outside counsel remains the actual city attorney. So you have the most experienced person who's there advising the council and with the council, and the lesser experienced person is in-house. And I thought from the beginning that really wasn't going to work. But we were committed to make it work, and it surprisingly seems to be working pretty well. I think if you talk to the city manager there, she would tell you that. And what it tends to do is focus the use of the in-house person on the day-to-day work that needs to be done with the staff. Projects that come to the city council tend to be sometimes more political, sometimes more complicated, tend to come through our office.
And so who makes that determination of what goes to the in-house and what goes to you?
Actually, it's done. I have a weekly phone conference with the city manager and the assistant city attorney who's there, and we sort things out. And typically, if it's something that's going to go to the council and it's going to involve something that's got a lot of policy choices to be made, or it's controversial, or it's got some complex legal aspects to it, that will get sent to us. If it is a contract with ODOT, it'll probably not come through us, because your chances of amending that contract with us.
And who staffs the city council and planning commission?
I go to the city council meetings and engage with the city manager and department heads.
So didn't they just have something on the ballot? It was so confusing and so just.
They did.
So when you say it's working well, that surprises me to hear you say that.
Yeah,
because I thought there was quite a bit of internal strife about it.
It's not a well-reported story, I guess is what I would say. If you talk to the assistant city attorney, I think the staff out there, the city manager, we'd say it works well. If you talk to 3 out of 5 council members, they would say it works well. 2 of the council members ran for office essentially opposing the prior administration. This idea was the product of the prior administration. And they're not happy with it. And that led to putting something on the ballot because there was controversy.
Didn't they want a clarification of the roles?
Yeah.
I mean, I find that, so I guess I find it, when you say this is working pretty well, to me it's working so poorly that they were willing to put it on the ballot and spend a lot of money to have the citizens determine who really should be in charge, and that was not even a clear answer. That seems like the worst outcome.
You got from the reporting, I don't think it was very good reporting.
Okay.
Because what was happening there was I think, a product of these 2 camps battling each other, and it turned out that putting something on the ballot on the charter was sort of a proxy for that battle.
And has that election already happened, or is that still to come? And what happened? What came of it?
The voters said no to the amendment, and the amendment was just sort of one would argue, I would argue, and did, that the amendment was unnecessary because the charter left plenty of room for the council already to do whatever they wanted in terms of organization services, and they didn't need any more clarification. So I was in the 3rd camp, I guess you would say. It's the pro, the con, and you don't need it. But I would encourage you to talk to the city manager there and find out.
Maybe you have.
I tried to Eileen. I think that their council continues to have the same conversation about what this looks like, because it's been so politically charged, at least for a couple of their council members. I think it keeps coming up. So I don't have a whole lot of stuff to add on that front, but I know it's been heartburn for everybody just over how elections have been.
It's really less about the city attorney's office and how it's organized, and more about the
political ramifications.
But you talk to Eileen, she can tell you.
I guess I definitely want some, in addition to salary and the specific job qualifications, and I want some really specific spelling out specifically, based on I haven't spent any time looking to see our charter, just to make sure that we don't run into something like, I don't even want to have this discussion,
Right. You're good. Done. So we have looked at the charter. You need to appoint a city attorney. You guys do that. It's very clearly spelled out that this is within your jurisdiction and that you select who that person is.
Okay. And there's no challenge, there's no room for someone to question whether you run the city?
I don't believe there is any question to that, but if you'd like me to get you some additional, it's like our charter is very, very short and very bare bones, but it's very clear about a couple of things, and this is one of the things I personally feel like is very clear.
I agree. All right. You have the discretion to do that. The issue in West Lynn was that the former city manager went ahead and hired and appointed this assistant that they have in-house, and that led to created. If the council had just said, we endorse it, this is our hire, none of this would have happened.
So is that true? So I had a question because I saw in a couple of different places where there's an assistant city attorney, and is that reflective of that sort of where that situation has occurred, where it's not someone who has the title of city attorney, but it's assistant city attorney?
Well, like Wilsonville and LO have 2, so they have an city attorney and an assistant.
But West
Lynn just has an assistant. That's because they have him as their
board, so that was why.
Well, and part of the problem is who reports to who. Right. So I've said, I think about 15 times that I am not hiring hiring a city attorney.
Right.
That you are hiring a city attorney and
Right.
will help you in any way. Because the assistant city attorney reports to the city manager, whereas
Okay.
the city attorney reports to the council. I do think that makeup is a little messy. And if you wanted to go down this, I would actually recommend that you manage something on that
If you
end.
reduce the Westland system, I would recommend that you hire that assistant who's going to be working in-house. I mean, either way you do it, the decision should be made here. This should be your hire.
100%.
And you
Thank you, Tim.
avoid completely the Westland, whatever happened there.
You mean it should be the council's hire?
City council's hire, your hire.
Yeah.
Well, so when we discussed this a couple of years ago, like the end of my first year on council, I'm sorry, you two weren't on the council then, but the financial calculation looked very different, and it was seemed pretty clear to me at that point in time to stick with the way we had it, the outside firm. But I mean, I have to kind of agree with Councilor Abma that looks quite different now, and I can see a lot of value to. I mean, it's all about who you find and how long they stay, of course. I mean, it is a bit of a crapshoot, but I think, assuming we find somebody good and they stay more than 2 years, it could really be a good staff building thing. I mean, not only smart financially, but could be really become a better resource in terms of the staff having easy access and the staff and doing some training and sort of seeing more of what the gaps are and what the staff needs help with and stuff. So
yeah, and I think the real advantage lies in the difference that's almost subtle. You're sitting there working on something and you have this little question, and I'm not going to spend the $100 or whatever to make that phone call. I think I'm right, as opposed to he's around the corner, and to say, is that going to work if we do it this way? And you know what I mean? It's going to be a more comfortable thing for.
of course, they're not all around the corner.
No, but
Some of
picking
them
up
are
the
still
phone
in a different
and know that
building.
they're
Oh,
not
you
going
would
to
be
spend
shocked at how fast they find me.
Yeah.
But just picking
People
up the
come
phone
over
and
here
not
all
having
the
to worry
time.
about spending money that it's already spent. It's part of the salary. I think that for staff is going to be a big advantage to the way they function. At least in sort of planning, community development realm, and probably even engineering.
Picking up on two things that you both just said. When we asked Gary to do a salary analysis, I'm concerned with the suggestion that 125 will get us the type of experience that we're looking for. So I'd be really interested in seeing, that analysis include years of service. And I also am concerned about starting so low and then this person running into a job that is going to require over 2,000 hours of billable work, basically, and then how long they end up staying around because there's burnout and they're not getting paid enough for that kind of work.
So, I'm great with that. And Angel and I talked a little bit offline. Sorry. I would like to work with Councilor Adman just to figure out some ideas. We'll send them to you guys. We can do it where you just send it directly back to me. So we don't end up with quorum issues. Mm-hmm. And then we can bring it back and talk about what everybody's kind of looking at if you want to. What I heard, at least from offline comments from several of you, was that you wanted at least 3+. So is there a general 3? Yeah, that's my question. It's
I'd say 5.
5+.
Minimum, me personally, but 5 you've been practicing. Ideally they've been doing municipal law of some kind. There's a big difference in pulling someone who's a litigator from one of the large law firms and saying, now you need to be a city attorney, but public records laws and all that stuff that they're not used to.
Right, totally.
Ordinance review. So I think it's key that you have someone who has some municipal law background. Either maybe they were an assistant somewhere, assistant city attorney or assistant county counsel or whatever.
Well, I would agree with that. I mean, I don't definitely agree with that, but I don't know that, I think they need 5 of that. I think 3 of that.
No, I said
plus
5 years
other-
well, I said practicing, but yeah, you guys, maybe 3. It just seems like such a young.
I'm not an attorney, I work with a lot of attorneys, I do not 3 years is enough experience.
No, I know.
That
I
3
do
years
not think
is,
3 years
I know
experience is enough.
well, I know the city, of course they're bigger cities, but Portland and Metro, they wouldn't even consider you unless you had probably 7 at the, that would even come in the door. But of course, they're larger law departments and it's a little different.
Well, but we're asking someone to be almost exclusively responsible for the work. And so I think that the difference is actually weighs on the other side, which is many more years of experience.
And again, some municipal, you've got to have some municipal.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you have that expertise.
To be the city attorney.
So when I say I'm doing this, I actually mean doing this. And then I'm going to edit it. And then I'm going to sit down with the HR manager and we're going to get something peer reviewed. Now, I think that these are important questions. That's why I'd really like to work with Counselor Ebba if you guys are comfortable just come up with a draft because I think there's a lot of nuances in here that I want to make sure that we have. So law school needs to be accredited, right? There's a bunch of stuff that goes into this too.
The math thing, don't forget the math
The math thing.
Right, that especially.
Geometry, yeah. But the question comes down to, are more than 2 of you interested in doing this? And I've heard from 2 of you, but I just want to confirm the votes that I'm hearing. So, you're on board?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we go down this road.
So that also means that I am probably entering into some negotiations with you, sir. So I'd like to start that probably in a week, but for right now, if you're comfortable. Yeah, continuing in this role, and we'll just talk about it in a week about how we do this. Okay?
All right.
Thank you. Thank you all. Is there anything besides the job description that you guys need to see based on that? And then let me rephrase. I'm going to send that to you, then we're going to do the market analysis.
Okay.
So you won't get that until we've gotten the first part vetted.
Okay. Sounds good.
What's next?
Zoning code housekeeping.
How's that going, Jess?
Who's going to do that?
Denny is.
Yeah.
Are we early?
Can we
Maybe we
take
can take 5 minutes.
Sure. Take 5
Yeah,
minutes.
let's take 5.
He's not expecting to be here until 5 unless there's more conversation we need around this. So,
Do you want to talk about the planning commission thing? I mean,
Sure. Yeah, I can absolutely do that. So,
that's a good idea.
So we found an interesting oops. Actually, I'm going to point out that our former planning chair, current planning commission member, Greg Hemer, caught it. So we are working on our comp plan right now. We've set the comp committee. You guys were able to give us feedback on the membership of that committee. We realized that we are out of compliance with the comp plan as it's currently drafted by 2 members. We don't have anyone representing Ardenwald, and we don't have anyone representing Hector Campbell. We'd like to remedy this. We also have a seat that we did not end up filling, so the recommendation from staff is that we drop that seat. And then we add 2 new seats representing those 2 districts to make sure that we are in compliance with the comp plan as drafted from our old company.
And that requires someone from every neighborhood association as the,
That makes sense.
Which might be something we want to look at and want to rewind.
I was making sure that I had at least one person from each neighborhood.
Interesting, okay. So we'll just open up.
So we're going to send those back. Actually, we've got applicants, so we're going to send those back to you and let you guys review them. And Jenny will ask for you guys to give him your feedback on those 7 applicants, or 9 applicants, if that works.
Okay.
Sounds good.
And special thanks to City Attorney Primus, who actually weighed in and was like, yeah, we need to do that, which is great. So we will get that out to you this week, and you guys can give us feedback, and we'll get those onto the next council agenda for approval. Okay. And Kira, are you running this tonight? I am not. Oh.
Denny's on his way.
Okay. Do you want to take 5 minutes? That's the only other thing. Okay.
We're in recess.
We're in recess.
Recessing for 5 minutes.
Which somehow always ends up with.
See, Kelly's even wearing it.
It's cold.
children?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's much more efficient.
The same stuff that's in our staff report.
Yeah, except we didn't really have the explanatory.
Yeah, we just had a list in the staff report, so this is more detailed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
You don't need to read this now.
Okay.
Go.
Well, we are ready then.
I'm going to guide us through it.
Okay, so next up we have zoning code housekeeping, which will be led by Denny Agnew.
It's time to do some housekeeping again. It's been time for about a year, but we're finally ready to actually launch it. And we'd actually scheduled a study session with you in March, and we've had one item come up that has prompted us to want to break this into two parts and accelerate some things forward, but keep both going. So I wanted to present the set of items that we've been talking about that have some substance to them. There are a number of others that are items that simply do some clarification and do some renumbering, correcting numbering errors and things like that. So I'm going to apologize now for this quick handout. Mark had asked for a little paragraph on each one, and this hardly does what was deserved, but what I attempted to do this afternoon, or mostly this afternoon, was capture some of the existing code language and just a line or two about what it was about the code that was an issue. And so there could very well be some typo problems in here because nobody has proofed this. We hit print 15 minutes ago. But what I'd like to do is just go through the 9 or so items there are here and explain what they are. And the first one was clarifying and revising some of the green building standards for height bonuses in the downtown. And the mayor and I have talked about this in the past, and I think I understand what some of the mayor's concerns were, that the Green Globes certification system in particular doesn't necessarily include an energy conservation component, and that you can get LEED, you could do Earth Advantage without kind of addressing energy conservation issues. So I think what I at least understood was that we wanted to somehow try to build in, have those types of rating systems in, and perhaps establish, if it's not too difficult, a system to have a minimum energy standard. I think that's what we wanted to get at. But so that could be a lot of work, or it could be kind of a simple, streamlined code thing. I think what we want to do with it is try to find other systems. We don't want to build our own kind of certification system. We want somebody else to do the certification, and just will require a little bit more work to collect that information and put it together and have a discussion about it. A couple months ago now, I actually did some research on this and found some information that I think is helpful. Put it on the shelf, waiting for this to start.
I was going to say, weren't you meeting with somebody who knew them all and was going to be able to shed light on which ones are?
Yeah, so we've been shooting back and forth a draft, and we have a couple little questions to answer as far as specifically what the certification is called relative to the organization that's doing the certifying, because sometimes the certification and the organization are two different names.
As an example, U.S. Green Building Council has LEED. So do you say U.S. Green Building Code Standards, or do you say LEED standards? And so we were trying to make sure that if you say you want a passive house, we know what we're writing into the code. So that's what we've been working on, is just trying to determine what that set of things really looks like.
And then just one last, on one of them, the path to net zero, which is the one we're using for the library, what we're not entirely sure of is whether or not they actually have a post-construction certification mode where they say, yes, you did what you said you were doing, because if that is, that's going to be one of the less expensive versions for a developer to do and still result in good energy efficiency. So once we know that, we should be able to piece together, and it will look very much like this, except there will be 4 or 5 other potential certification paths, and the Green Globes won't be there.
So it won't be an EG list, it'll be one of these 5, pick one of these 5 list. Yeah.
We're trying to find a way to do this really simple. Part of my concern is making sure that the planning staff is able to go through a process without having to be an expert in these things. Right. So just making sure that the certification is really clear and that we know what the trigger points are.
So what we run into on the EUI concept that we were originally starting to talk about is that EUI is utterly dependent in the usage So until you specifically know literally what is going to be in that commercial space, is it going to be a bakery or is it going to be a doll shop? You know, those are different EUIs for certain things. So that started to look a lot harder to do and a lot trickier to manage than just saying, okay, if you do LEED Gold, if you do Earth Advantage Gold, if you do, you know, any of these things, they will qualify you, and we'll know that we're getting an energy efficient building.
But if we put certain titled certifications in there and other certifications come along, then how, you know, now there's, you know, the whatever, you know.
Well, and Denny tried to get around that the first time.
Yeah,
That's which is why we ended up with what we ended up with.
Yeah, because it could be, I mean, there was, you know, new certification opportunities I would think would come on board every once in a while. And so how would you deal with that if it's kind of like, you know, when people write bylaws and make them too specific and now you can't live with them because things change.
Once you take the
And
list
that would be my
approach-
concern.
Yeah, once you take the list approach, then you're going to
Yeah,
need to
but
You've
update
got to update
Yeah.
it consistently,
Well,
you know,
that's-
just constantly.
That's one, we could continue to update it. We could, I mean, based on the governor's executive order, this should only matter for about the next 10, 12 years, and then it shouldn't matter anymore because she is proposing that the state get on a process to get all buildings up to the kinds of levels that we're talking about. So eventually, it's going to be irrelevant. So then we'll have to go back to, well, what are we going to give a fifth floor blood?
Yeah.
So a couple of additions to that, Counselor. One is that when I started doing this, there was one.
Well, that's what I mean.
There's
So
one.
there's more that come along all the time.
And they are constantly growing. What I have not seen is they become less stringent. They usually become more.
Become more
Which I think you
stringent.
guys want if you're giving the fifth floor.
Yeah.
And the tax incentive in particular.
But it may not be. We may need to do a revision of this. The second piece is because they're changing so much, LEED re-ups every 3 years. I think they reset all their standards. I mean, there's a new version of it. I'm nervous about having staff expected to know more than one program, let alone more than one program that re-ups every 3 years. So there isn't a great way to... They're not going to be the experts in this field.
On the other hand, if somebody's building this kind of scale of project, and this new one, say a year and a half from now, a new one comes in, and there's a new one out there, and we haven't updated this, but this developer is like, I want to use this. I mean, those discussions start happening at pre-app time, and there's time for us to then
Us to
just
get it
bring it
added
to
in.
us and us to say, okay, yeah, we'll let that.
Can we build in a process for that into the,
Well,
I
it's
mean,
called we have a process for changing anything.
right, so can we just,
already.
Or
Timing is
it would
an
just happen because it would be
timing is an issue,
requested.
what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, as a developer comes in and wants to use this particular system, we could always amend the code, but there's, you know, at
Yeah, I
least
don't-
But we could give a
Okay.
variance too.
You want a
That's,
variance.
I want a variance, I want to build in
We-
like, yeah, can you, like,
I
That's
think
can you
already-
come in with
it's
It's in
already
something
there
about,
anyhow, isn't it?
oh, and then,
You
okay,
just
so
do the
then,
gas, you do a variance
Yeah.
process.
we could do something like that.
or other approved.
There's a height variance is one mechanism, but a alternative system to verify a rating system or a green building system, we could do that.
so an alternatively approved by.
Yeah, you could have a list and then have a provision to say, or other approved by city council.
Yeah, so we kind of streamline that early on in the process rather than going through a full variance or a full code change.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd rather have it be another approved by city council than calling it a variance. I like keeping a variance as to a sort of quantifiable numerical
Yeah,
thing.
Measure.
Yeah.
That's kind of what, that's
Okay.
where my head was thinking.
So I had another question too. I thought I heard you say something about, and so help me, you know, understand the whole thing. That so like a bakery is going to use or have a different energy standard or a different consumption of use than, say, a bank does or a shoe repair person. So how would that affect the developer who builds a building on spec? They don't know yet.
But if they're, because these standards are all based on how efficient the building, just as a building without use. It's not taking into account the use afterwards per se. It's creating a better envelope, better windows, adding solar, or it's things like that, or a better HVAC system, or maybe it's using the heat pump. So it's doing all of those things. So it doesn't really matter if a bakery moves in there or a doll store. It's still, that building is going to have been built more efficiently. Now,
they'll be more efficient
if you had that information going in. Obviously, there's things that a smart contractor could do in addition, because they could use the excess heat from the bakery to heat the building. Right, or whatever. But without knowing that up front, all we're asking them to do is build buildings that are better insulated with smarter HVAC systems, smarter air exchange than what building code currently requires.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We don't need to solve this today, but I think it's one of the meatier topics that we have to talk about in a way. So we've framed these as housekeeping. I want to frame them as housekeeping and policy light. So we've got some things here that we need to, that aren't just straightforward housekeeping. Ready to move to the next one?
Sure. Do you have these, sorry, I'm just wondering about format. Do you have these in any particular order? Like, do you have an item, do you know which ones are the housekeeping or policy light? Are they?
I don't.
Okay.
I'm going to suggest a couple at the end.
Thank you.
Okay. The order was strictly following the order that we put them in the staff report, and the staff report was just grabbing them from the list that we had put together earlier. So
we have a working list back at the end, and we just dump things into it, but they're not in any yet. They're not prioritized yet.
The next one is the definition of senior and retirement housing. And the definition in the code is pretty restrictive. It basically says that senior and retirement housing shall have no more than one bedroom per unit and not have more than 800 square feet per dwelling unit. Market trends are to provide 2 bedrooms, in some cases 3. And this issues come up because the Rusk Road, Kellogg Creek Road site, the Turning Point Church site, there is a senior housing, assisted living facility that would like to locate there. Our code does not set out a clear path for a facility that has senior housing, some assisted living, and like a nursing home component for memory care. We have a couple of different ways you can approach it. One is through congregate care, the other is senior housing and nursing home. Every one of those has some glitch in the code for this model of that's out there on the market. I mean, I don't know how many of you have kind of experience with folks that have that lived in these types of units. But my mother-in-law had lived in one for the last few years, and it's got all those components. It's got a pretty independent housing piece. It's got an assisted living piece and a memory care piece.
Well, and so we had one come to Planning Commission, the one that's on King Road, and they were adding memory care.
Yep.
And they basically segregated so many units, and it sort of became, theoretically partitioned between the
because memory care needs a different level of service than assisted living.
And it didn't fit in any of our code definitions or whatever.
And we looked at kind of how best to address this in kind of a streamlined way, I guess I would say, without trying to open up everything. And the simplest way of trying to get at it was to amend the senior and retirement housing section, because, again, you know, one bedroom is pretty limiting for many elderly folks. And then, so they would come in as a senior retirement housing facility and a nursing home. And a senior and retirement housing is a conditional use. A nursing home is a community service use. So they come in with both of those applications at the same time. And actually, nursing homes have a requirement that it be on a collector or arterial street. So they would probably apply for a variance to that requirement. So it's really messy. But this is the critical thing. I think the variance is understandable. You can't vary a definition, so they couldn't come in with a variance to this.
So, and it is nursing home the title we're using?
It would be the memory care portion of the application.
But even the term nursing home.
Nursing home is so archaic.
Yeah,
And retirement age.
Totally archaic.
I don't even know why we're doing that. Senior and retirement housing.
Oh,
I retired at
What's
75.
that? Yeah, my brother just retired this week. He's 47. But
Okay, this is where I'm gonna split this into two parts. There's the accelerated component, because we have somebody out there that would really like to make an application right now. And this is the part that I'd like to suggest that we accelerate. We can put this same topic into the other track to try to clean up all the language. But
would you increase?
because I think it's a bigger discussion. And I think it's actually where we want to get at it is probably through the congregate housing definition even more than here. But I asked this guy, well, what do you call yourself? And he says, well, whatever the local government, however it fit into the local government definition. And I mean, I think that's true, because everybody's got these.
They have these terms. I just found out in just the last few days that what is referred to in the industry now as rehab centers is actually a skilled nursing facility. It's a SNF. And that never would have entered my mind. I used to work in a skilled nursing facility, and it just never occurred to me that when a friend of mine is in rehab, that he's actually in a SNF.
It almost seems like we just need like the retirement community, and then under retirement community, all of these things can happen.
Well, I even retire. I don't even.
Yeah, I don't even know.
It's not. Yeah.
Some people.
Bill McDonald.
Some people.
Lived in Glenmore and worked downtown for 2 years.
Well, so it's clear we have a bigger discussion
Yeah,
to have.
I like the idea of
I like
splitting
the
it.
idea of, and so do you need more than 800 square
Yeah.
feet as well?
I'm
Or
not
you
sure.
think the 2-bedroom is the?
I'm not 100% sure about the square footage piece. I want to go back. I think that's really workable for these guys, but it may be they need a little bit more
There's
space.
a couple of units at Glenmore that are 2-bedroom. You might just ask them how many square feet they are, because that's in the county. So it's actually in Happy Valley. So they, maybe have different regs out there.
I looked at some for my mom, not necessarily around here, but I mean, there's plenty of 2 bedrooms under 800 square feet. But
Is there?
maybe some
Yeah.
that
See, I can't.
require
I don't do feet very well, so I can't visualize that.
there-
But I definitely agree. It needs to be more than 1 bedroom. Yeah.
Was there a point in regulating the size? Why do we care if it's 1,500 square feet or whatever?
Right.
I think it's because we lowered the parking requirement for these kinds of units, so there was some connection there. Is what I'm not sure.
You don't want them to become general purpose house. I mean, if you're giving them.
But they have to qualify in all these other ways. That's not
Right.
That's not what's happening.
If they're
Well,
living in one
not
of those.
necessarily. Not if they're market rate. They're not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that may well be, but if it's, there are so many of these different companies now that have these places, so if you wanted to move in there, you have to qualify for a certain level of care. Either you're totally independent, or you're assisted, or you're skilled, or,
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to the next one. When we adopted our marijuana business code requirements, we included some standards that dealt with security and odor control and the spacing requirements and so on. Well, when one of the, Sam Vandergriff, our building official, went to a seminar or work session with other building officials, and something that was highlighted for her was that building or zoning codes have been encroaching into the area of building and mechanical codes. And so she pointed to in her seminar or whatever it was, they pointed to the state law that basically said you can't require things like this in your zoning ordinance. So we need to figure out either another way of getting at the odor control issue and the ventilation issue, or pulling it out entirely. And I'm not sure what the best solution is. I haven't done research with other jurisdictions to see what they've done. We basically stole our language from Hillsborough, so I'm not sure what they did.
Has she brought this up with the state building code people?
Oh, that's where she learned about it.
What's their suggestion as to where?
I don't think they had a. They said the mechanical code takes care of this. That was their solution. Yeah. So
I think some other codes too had circled back to whatever the nuisance section of the municipal code said, but some of their nuisance control, they had very different language than we had, so there may be an opportunity to deal with it from that perspective, and just circle it and plug it there as opposed to putting it into the zoning code. So.
I don't know that we've had any complaints related to odors, but I know we walked around one of the buildings out there, and you can definitely smell it, but it's not.
You can smell it in the neighborhood, but I don't know.
Yeah, depends how close you are. Yeah.
Can you from the one that's in the industrial area?
I don't know where it is, but I know every time I walk from my
There's
train.
one on Olson Street we got lots of complaints about. So that may be the one you're
That's a grower.
That was our medical grower.
Medical grower.
Wow.
And that's why this all came about, was because when we started thinking about it, people were coming and saying, look, the medical growers already smell bad enough.
Yeah.
We're talking about,
Bigger
big of a thing. Better have.
So you're saying you guys walked around
Just in one of the.
it's the building with the newer automated billboard, right?
Yeah, that one. That one. You can smell some stuff outside, but it's not. And those are processors. They do the extraction and make some.
Oh, there's not a grower in there? I thought we had a grower.
There's a grow facility on the other side. I mean, back when we were talking about
the other
this,
side.
there was.
It doesn't smell so much when it's growing. It just smells when you start doing things to it.
No, when it's ready for harvest, it starts
smells,
smelling.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this was one of those that came up, I don't know, 9 months ago or so. It's been on the list a long time, and we haven't had any complaints. We'll come up with.
So your thought is just to probably pull it out of where it is, and if we put in anything, just put it in the nuisance.
That's a possibility. This was pretty prescriptive about how you went about dealing with it. And I think we can either be a little bit less prescriptive or keep it in the nuisance section.
If it's in the nuisance section, it would only be complaint driven, right? You wouldn't be required to install these things
This is
prior
true.
to.
Yeah.
I mean, how in the world do you, after the fact?
It's more of a performance-based.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we have business permits for marijuana business, or specifically, or things where they have to do this beforehand.
Again, I just need to do a little bit more work to figure out what alternative there might be that doesn't violate this section of state code, or of the building code.
So we can't have we can't have more restrictive things that are in the state building code?
I was sort of surprised by
That's the
this.
same thing we ran into on energy.
Yeah.
I know I've violated that provision. It's been around for a long time, too, and I know I've messed with it before.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, we keep telling people how to build things, and we're not supposed to do that, I guess. So,
That's right.
yeah.
This came up because of the mechanical code section, and I don't know, it was a surprise to me.
I was just say, I didn't think, I mean, so maybe it belongs in mechanical code, but I thought we could have our own supplemental mechanical code to state law.
We can actually do this.
Yeah.
We could have this language, but it needs to be okayed by the state and recertified every
Annual.
couple of years.
Annual.
Yeah. Annually? Was that what it was? Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was
Since we haven't
messier
had any
than
complaints, it doesn't.
we wanted to follow.
Very good use of
Time.
staff time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Next item was something that came up when we processed a vacation rental up in the Waverly neighborhood. We realized that we didn't have, and for the short-term rentals, we required a mechanism where we did inspections for fire code and building code for those units that are being rented out. But we didn't build in a similar check system for vacation rentals. And partly it was because the short-term rentals are a home occupation where there's a resident there. The vacation rentals are those where there's no resident. So I think what we did with the home occupation process was we basically said through the licensing, through your business registration, we're going to catch it. And we didn't do that with vacation rentals, so we want to build that in. The other part of it is at that particular hearing, a number of neighbors came forward and said, we want to know who to call if there's a party, if there's something that's obnoxious that's going on. So the Planning Commission basically recommended to staff that we come forward with a code amendment that would at least annually have that operator of the vacation rental send out notice to neighbors that would say what the who to call in the event of a problem, as opposed to the police. I thought that was probably a good process.
Well, I could see it if it was like, it was leaking, like there was a water break and water was pouring out or something like that. And then who do we call? Because we need to be able to let the owner know that they've got this problem. But a party, it should be the cops, just like it's the cops for anybody else. If it's your neighbor, if it's a rental, a long-term rental, why isn't it?
Well, it might be parking, it might be just some issue. It was just having a contact to talk to.
I will tell you that, and I just came back from staying in a vacation rental in Palm Springs, and they absolutely have that, and they also have very high fines for noise calls if you call the police, and it's like $500 or something for a noise call. But they definitely have that you have to have designated info for the neighbors.
Surrounding.
Yeah, for the neighbor, you have to have a property manager that the neighbors know how to contact.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I mean, for some reason, I feel like I was watching this hearing. I'm not sure.
I did watch this hearing.
Maybe I did, because I think I remember, the sentiment from the neighbors was that we don't want to call the police on our neighbor all the time. Like,
Right.
we know who, we just want to know who to call for this
Right.
sort of thing that's always, just, if this is a repeated thing, and we just want to know, like, how can we make contact to let you know that this is a problem?
Right.
Instead of calling the police on you all the time.
And in that case, the owners are not here much, right?
No, that's right.
Yeah.
So I don't know, if you have a party going on and you call the person who lives in Wyoming who owns this place or whatever, I don't know if that's...
No. You had to have a local property.
Oh, you had to designate someone locally that they could call.
Yeah.
Property manager of some type.
I mean, it could be a friend. It didn't necessarily mean you had a,
Professional,
professional.
hire, probably.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
if there are examples, I mean, I think that's an interesting idea.
Palm
It's more
Springs just
friendly.
did a huge thing about a year ago where they rewrote all their, they've also made it a lot harder to do. I mean, they've imposed limits on the number of rentals and stuff.
Well, that definitely gets into policy light.
Well, I mean, you could just look at it for the other, but.
Yeah.
It also sounds like a field trip.
Field trip, yeah. I have friends down there. We have
Well, and I
places
know
to stay.
Ashland's done a lot of work on this.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
I think
that
a
would
couple
be-
of the
yeah.
coastal cities too, but I know Ashland.
Ashland's probably a good.
Yeah.
Well, there'll be more discussion about that one. The next one came up during the Guardian application downtown. And
Right. Something we got in some report called the building
Axle tree.
Axle Tree. It's not Galaxy, it's Axle Tree.
yeah, I think that's
Project
right.
Galaxy was the name that staff, when you're kind of creating sort of this confidential name of a project before it gets out there, you assign it a name.
Oh,
In the
I
economic
see.
development world, that's what happens. But anyway, Project Galaxy was what.
Oh, that
we
wasn't
had called it.
Guardian's name.
Oh, okay. And that's
Got
what
it.
we kept calling it because we liked it. But no, I think the official name
It's an
is.
axle tree.
I like Galaxy better than Axle
I
Tree.
know. I think Guardians of the Galaxy was coming out.
Yeah.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. But,
Okay,
Well,
sorry.
this was highlighted during that application process. When we did the code amendments for moving forward Milwaukee for the downtown and set up some of the new downtown design standards, we had two sets of standards. One were the base zone standards that basically dealt with some of the dimensional requirements of a building. And the other were the design standards that dealt with some of the features of the building, windows, wall materials, other types of issues. And then we set up the alternative path system. So we had a clear and objective set of standards you'd have to meet. And then we said, if you wanted to vary from the design standards, not the base zone standards, if you wanted to vary from the design standards, you could go through the design guidelines process, go to the DLC, and then go to the Planning Commission. Well, we put the step back provision for the fourth and fifth floors in both the base zone standards and the design guidelines. And in the base zone standards, it means that you have to go through the variance procedure to get that step back, rather than just simply, I don't know if it's simply, but just the design guidelines that deal with the design features of the building. And through that process in particular, there were design elements that the architect suggested to try to bring the scale down. So through that, and if I recall back, I think we thought when we were building the design guideline, the alternative design guideline path, that you would be using that design guideline path to vary this particular item. As it is, if one wants to do anything but do that step back, they need a variance as well as the alternative design guideline process. And what we're suggesting here is to take this particular standard out of the base zone standards and keep it only in the design guideline section, not design guideline, but the design standard section, so that varying this is possible through that design guideline process rather than through it's still a standard. So if somebody wanted to do a clear and objective path approval, they would need to do the step backs, but it would give them a little bit more flexibility in varying that. I think it's just, we feel it's a little less vulnerable to be going through the design guideline process than going through a variance. There's just there's more challenges in meeting the variance criteria. So that was
You convinced us.
yeah.
Next.
Our economic development group feels more strongly than I do about that too.
So just before we keep going, I just wanted to make an announcement for the air. We're closing the library at 7 o'clock tonight. So people, if you're coming downtown, just so you know, library closes at 7. Sorry for the interruption.
It's snowing pretty heavy.
It's starting to, the snow's getting more legitimate. So
Chunks now.
just letting you know.
Okay, next one was,
It's not snowing heavy.
this is not a land use change, but it's a change that I promised Ann I would take on a year ago, and I still haven't got to it. So this was a change to the temporary event process to basically build in a temporary use provision because, and it wouldn't just deal with this, but it deals with the paddleboard rental in Milwaukee Bay Park. We don't have a way to really allow that in a clean way. We've used the temporary event permit process, but it's not the right process. And so this is a good thing for the community, and we didn't have a way to really do it. So we want to get another process in place.
Okay, good.
The next one down is a prohibition in the code for compound lot lines in land divisions. And what this is a standard that you cannot vary. Our variance language says you can't vary things that are prohibited. And in the code, it says that, am I going to get this right? But if you were trying to do like a partition, your lot line can't vary by more than 10%. Let's say you've got 2 lots, my bad drawing here, and I've got a tree right here, and I don't want the lot line to go right through the tree, bring the lot down over, and so the center lot line that splits between the 2 parcels has some jog in it. Well, that jog can't be more than 10%. That's not a particularly good example, but there are odd-shaped lots out there where you just can't seem to make the lots fit without dealing with this issue. And so we basically need a variance process to allow that lot line to be shifted more than 10%. Current code language doesn't let you do that. So,
Any idea what the thinking was?
I thought you guys were on the planning commission when this was adopted.
When it came about, I don't remember
This at
that.
all.
I don't know.
That's why when I first read that, I was like, I have no idea.
No,
what
I
that
remember
even
going, what's a
says.
compound lot? Well,
Yeah,
I don't know what that was. But we
That
did
was
have,
before my time.
we did have a case where there was a line where it had an angled, like it was kind of a trapezoidal shaped piece of property, and there were some, they weren't allowed to do something.
Maybe someone hoped it would avoid disputes later, it would be easier to just,
Say no.
the more
Just
recommended.
Every city has a different rule on this, in my experience. And some, they're usually the product of some controversial case where somebody
Something
didn't like
happened.
a lot, and so you ended up with some drawing stuck in the code that says you can't do this.
Yeah.
It's just.
Well, and there was a
Yeah.
big backlash in the late 90s about flag lots too. It may have come out of some of that.
I think that's where it came about. But we don't have, we don't have a lot of heartburn about the standard itself. It's just that you can't vary the standard.
Out of it
you
if
know?
they need to.
Right.
That's, right. Gives me heartburn, so
Yeah.
To have the
having
10%, yeah.
something that's so
Well,
arbitrary, I mean,
when the group of us can't say why it should be there, then to me,
Yeah.
what the heck do you have it there? And
Right.
if no one can say, well, this is a good reason to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The next one is one that we just cooked up on our own because we don't have enough places to get our cars repaired out on Johnson Creek Road. But there aren't any places. Our code, we basically eliminated all of the locations where you can do car repair with the mixed use by changing our commercial districts to mixed use. And so we thought it's worth a discussion to look at whether or not we ought to allow car repair in the manufacturing zone, the leftover manufacturing zone that we have out on Johnson Creek Road.
Are we allowing, I'm trying to remember, North
No, and
Milwaukee. We're not allowing it in North Milwaukee.
And that's part of the issue.
But isn't there already a guy there that's doing that?
Well, part of the, well, and he's pre-existing, we think.
Sure.
But because of the NMIA process, the entire west side of McLaughlin is all Zone M manufacturing. That's all going away now as well. So the Johnson Creek manufacturing zone is the only remaining M manufacturing zone. That's sort of this open kind of thing of manufacturing that there is. So it's double duty with what Denny was saying, that we're running out of places where we are allowing auto repair, and the manufacturing zone is kind of the last place that it might be appropriate, and on Johnson Creek Boulevard, it's currently not allowed. So it seems we get a lot of requests.
And I believe the only place that you can do it right now is in the little CG. There are two remaining GCCG zones, commercial, general commercial zoning, one of which is the little shopping center at King and Linwood, and the other is some school district-owned property south of 224.
Right.
So.
Oh, the one on Lake Road?
Yeah.
Which they're going to probably be selling?
There's a little commercial office there that I don't know that they still, maybe they sold it, I'm not sure, but there's an office there that's selling C3. And those may not exist after we're done with the comp plan as that zone, you know? I mean, I expect we're going to think about those.
I mean, we do allow it in the central Milwaukee zone, but everything does need to be inside and so on. But there isn't a lot of opportunity there for someone to do that either.
So I thought we eliminated that.
But even with the central Milwaukee, there's not a lot of land opportunity for someone to have a shop, and so it seems appropriate, we think.
So my notes are wrong.
So it would be able to be on 32nd?
In the central Milwaukee, not in the neighborhood mixed use, but in the central Milwaukee.
Well, central would be.
And it would have to be
Wouldn't that be the Murphy site?
Murphy site doesn't.
The Murphy site, but not on 32nd Avenue. No,
right.
Not like where licenses and that type of thing.
There's one that's closed recently.
I don't think it would be a conditional use on 32nd.
My notes are wrong then, and I didn't have Vera read this stuff before I came out, so.
But it's one of those uses that, there's a place for that in a community, and we've done a pretty good job of making it difficult to locate that.
And you say you do get requests.
Yes, especially on Johnson Creek, that particular area has, it could have a pretty good variety, and the kinds of buildings that are there as well.
Yeah, I would think
could really
that
lend
fits
themselves to that
well.
sort of thing, but we don't allow that commercial vehicle repair. We allow for fleet repair or that kind of, but for any one of us to just bring our personal vehicle there, it's really specific that that's not the kind of repair we allow, and we think.
And would there be language around not allowing a big accumulation of cars that are not
and we can
running outside the building?
We can create some performance standards to go with that.
And again, it was an idea that came up, and we're not 100% sure it's a great idea, because that is additional industrial land,
Well, I was going to say, there was a thing we had to go through some years ago from Metro about, because that was our only M, like, there's some sort of higher classification of industrial land that is called out in
There's
the...
employment and there's industrial manufacturing. And I don't think we have any of the higher level designation.
We did. Some of that precision cast parts and right along in there was, and we had to do something.
We'll double check and look.
Okay. Yeah, we had to do something 10 or 12 years ago to whatever, so that we weren't running afoul of some statewide planning goal.
And primarily what the Metro Code provision does is it was a restriction about large-scale commercial in those areas.
Right, that's what it was.
Over 60,000 square feet.
Right, that's what it was.
Yeah.
The Title IV lands, I think they are.
Right.
Yeah.
A couple more. We've had questions come up about historic property identification signs, and the sign code isn't really clear about allowing for those, so this was more of just try to make an allowance for that. And then this was something I noticed a couple of years ago, is the downtown doesn't allow neon signs, and we have a couple of historic neon signs in a way that we should probably acknowledge, and it is a popular way of advertising these days, so it would seem to make sense to allow them. Next one was indoor recreation uses in the CG zone, and I didn't remember this one, but I pulled it from the list.
The way the code is written for the CG zone, indoor recreation like a gym or a CrossFit or, something like that is not very clearly outlined in the CG zone, which is that Wichita Plaza area, essentially. It's been interpreted to mean that, over time. But the way the other sections of the code have evolved and include this use category called indoor recreation, and we want to make the CG zone consistent with what the rest of the code is calling a fitness facility, a gym, a 24-hour fitness, whatever, and it's not right now. So that way it's very clear that, yeah, it's allowed. We always intended for it to be allowed, but we want to make sure that the nomenclature is correct.
And the last one I have notes on is another one that came up with the Guardian project is in Title 12, which is the streets and sidewalk section of the code. We have access spacing standards, and there is a standard along collector streets for 300-foot spacing of driveways and streets. So we have almost every street downtown is a collector street. So you cannot put a driveway in to any building anywhere in the downtown. So
that's a problem.
we thought we might want to fix that.
Parking.
So we had a variance.
Variance for Guardian.
Guardian had a variance, so we need to clean that up.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's supportable, obviously, but it opens up that door to appeal for more access to projects.
Potentially for something that we're requiring of them to do. That's crazy.
The last two bullets were basically truly simple housekeeping things. They were, Vera had mentioned we have this list, and these were on that, so I didn't bother to go into any detail with those. Touch a bunch of different sections, but they're not substantive at all.
Some of them are scrivener's errors, and they really are.
So the one item that seemed to have some pressing need was the senior housing to try to accommodate this development for an assisted living facility. And those guys are trying right now to negotiate a timeline and a price and everything else with the church. So I'd mentioned that we were doing this, and I'd like to put that one forward on a more accelerated path. We would still start the process for everything else, but we might. But rather than keep them all lumped together, I know it's going to take some time and some thinking to work through all of the rest of these. Where we're going to have to talk about them and think about them. And there's a few of these that I think can just kind of slide right on through. So I'd suggest we let the senior retirement one, the small little code things, the last two bullets, and maybe the access way one downtown go right away.
I would like to see the green building standards move as quickly as possible too.
Okay.
So.
I mean, I suspect we've got a learning curve on that, all of us. Maybe you don't, but the rest of us do. So, I mean, I do think that would slow things down.
We're not talking about this taking a long time, either path. So we're working on this over the course going into the summer.
And we're ready to basically do, like next week, code language for the ones that we're talking about and start the notice process and everything else. The other ones, we need a few more weeks to kind of work out a draft and get something noticed. But I was sort of thinking a month apart, basically, to take these forward. But hopefully the accelerated set is adopted in 3 months, that they're not anything that we really have to get tied up in.
Yeah, if that's the timeline, one week having language ready, then I think I agree with those, the ones you mentioned.
So you're saying, but adopted in 3 months? That's the accelerated one?
The short accelerated one would be a 3 month.
And then the non-accelerated ones would be adopted?
5 months, because we're going to be talking about a number of these issues for more than one meeting.
So the concern really is if we get to planning commission and people want to talk about them, it slows us down. We have to take a couple of meetings to get through these with the planning commissioner. So the concern is that some of these are policy related and they're going to take more time, they're going to take more discussion with the commission and with you. Whereas we have one that's really not contentious and it's going to directly impact our ability to do a type of development that you guys wanted to look at. So that was our thought process, and then there's 2 little ones that are really so de minimis that nobody's going to talk about them. So our hope is that we could rush this super fast.
Works for me.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Super fast is relative.
3 months. As fast as when I asked about changing code, you guys told me 6. So 3 months is like massively fast, and 5 months is still faster than we originally talked about.
What's the fastest we can do it if everything clicked? I mean,
It's 3 months, about the
It's 3
fastest.
months?
We have a 40-day notice. Once we get the draft written, we have a 30-day notice to Metro and DLCD.
Metro's 45.
I thought they changed it. I think our code still says.
Our code says 45.
Well, that's one of the fixes.
But you still have to do it.
So we have this notice to Metro and to DLCD, and then we have and that's got to be 45 days before the first evidentiary hearing. So, and then we have the hearing and a decision, and we've got at least 2 weeks, preferably a month between planning commission and council. So there's a couple months right there.
So 3 months.
So I think 3 months is the best we can do.
Yeah.
Code amendment.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Well, we won't be back at the next meeting to talk about these things.
Because we just did it.
Yeah.
All right, unless anybody else has anything else we need to talk about? Nope. All right, then the work session is adjourned, and we will go into regular session at 6 o'clock.